Hello, lovely souls. Welcome to the Awakening to Your Soul Self podcast. I'm Christina Loureiro, certified angel messenger and angel Reiki master teacher. My spiritual journey began in the spring of 2022 when my spirit team nudged me to listen to the amazing Angels in Awakening podcast. Since then, I've been learning to use my spiritual gifts and growing increasingly curious about spirituality and various healing modalities. I'm so excited for you to join me on this special journey as we dive into spirituality, healing, while exchanging our wisdom and profound insights with other remarkable healers. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, get cozy, and let's embark on the spiritual journey together. Hello, lovely souls. Welcome back to the Awakening to Your Soul Self podcast. I have Ashley-Ann Perrieira here. She is a wonderful soul. She has Studio Press, which is her self-publishing company. She's got a podcast. We're going to talk about her spiritual awakening and so much more. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm actually so grateful, and it just feels so aligned. The title of your podcast, your energy. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So I always like to start off with the guest introducing themselves. So who are you and what do you do?
Oh my gosh. I now feel what it feels like to be on the other end of this, and I haven't answered that question in forever, but and I honestly, what feels so true is that that's such a big question in the sense of like I've constantly battled with that question, funny
Yeah.
enough. But in terms of, like what I do, I really see myself as, I know this sounds strange, but like this alchemist in so many ways, in the sense of, if you think
Ooh.
about alchemy, it's all
Yeah.
about transformation, right? Like it's all about turning something into something else. And um I see myself in the way that I am with healing and the work that I do with cacao, and really focusing on like being able to heal our lineages is such a big piece of this. And then also, the journey then ties into being able to help people tell their stories, right? And when we have
Yeah.
this journey, this healing, this
Mm-hmm.
spiritual awakening, we feel this pull to be able to share it and communicate it. And we ultimately go through this transformation too. So I feel like in ways like that's who I am, that's my essence. As the Studio Press, you said, and yeah, that's kind of my essence.
I love your energy. I loved your energy even before we started chatting. Honestly, when you commented on my post, I was like, I just feel aligned with this girl. I need to hook up with her.
I
Um,
love that.
and then we're Portuguese too, so that's just an extra
Right?
alignment for us.
I know. And then, unfortunately, some things happen with Euro, but it's all good. It's all good.
All good. So, can you go into your spiritual awakening, just a little snippet for people?
Yeah, I think where it really begins ends up being almost a decade ago or more than a decade ago. I the real backstory in summary is that I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom raised my sisters and I, and I'm the youngest of three. And well, in ways, I'm the youngest of three on one side, but my dad really wasn't around when I was younger. And to be honest, that was really just my normal in life. Like, it was just like, we've got us, like it's us, the
Yeah.
four pack. You know what I mean? There was just,
Mm-hmm.
that was my normal. And there were times that I noticed it, being in school, and you have like parent teacher interviews and those kinds of nights, and just seeing, all my friends with their dads, like there was moments, right? Um, and not to say that I never saw my dad, but it was just very inconsistent. There was no, he lived in the States, so there was no consistency there. But I would say it was much when I was in my late teens, early 20s, where I really felt it when he moved back to Canada, unfortunately, after a tragic, passing of my cousin. And that's when I kind of really started to feel it. And I was thinking, like, okay, we're now in the same country. We're gonna have this relationship. And it wasn't at all what I expected. And so that's where I feel like things really began, where I was being triggered and noticing what was coming up for me. And it really sparked this journey for me. I was also in between. I feel like a really big part of the story is that I was in an accident and I was hit by a car. And, there was this
Oh,
expectation to just feel my family and their love and just, "Hey, are you okay?" And pick up the phone, we had experienced death, and thankfully, there wasn't, like, any major injuries after this accident, but, it's a scary moment, and so you're thinking that this concept of family so tight and so
yeah.
close, you expect the love and support, and after not receiving that from my dad and majority of his side of the family, I was kind of really pissed off, not gonna lie,
Yeah.
and it was just interesting how I really changed as a person, and about a year later, my mom, I remember her sharing at the dinner table, she kinda said this, she goes, "Ashley, you don't have to hate the world," and it was in that moment that I
Mm,
realized I had just become someone that I didn't even recognize anymore. I was so bitter. I was just so angry. And that's really what sparked things for me. And, I went on this journey with really trying to heal that relationship with my dad. And it wasn't easy, but we're here. And after taking those steps, I'm so grateful in so many ways that we were able to mend and repair and whatever you want to call it, heal,
yeah.
whatever that looks like?
Yeah. I almost feel like, I mean, death is unfortunate, but sometimes that's what brings people together. And
100%.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't know all about you and your family, but I feel like if it wasn't, I don't know if he would have come to Canada. You know what I
Correct.
mean?
And you know what? I've never actually thought or gone down that rabbit hole. Sometimes I like to play with that. Like, what would
Mhm.
life look like if this didn't happen? I've never played with that, but that's such a big piece. It does have a way of bringing people together. And I will say that I owe a lot of my perspective and value about life, and the preciousness and the gift that it is. I owe it to all the different losses that I've had in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I love how your mom was like, you don't have to hate the world. I almost get a sense that it I mean, it was your mom, but I also have a sense that it was spirit as well, being like, you gotta tell her that, she's gonna get past this and she's gonna eventually forgive your dad about everything.
Yeah.
Because, growing up, it's like, I mean, I was thankful I still have both parents. But a lot of my friends only had a single parent, and
Mm.
they always were like, well, you have two parents. Like, yes, I have two parents, but it doesn't mean that everything's all hunky dory. I
100%.
mean, luckily, thankfully, in my life it was, but you know what I mean? It's everybody's life experience is different. You
Mhm.
can have, one parent, you compare it to somebody else, and it's not going to be exactly the same. And I think that's very
100%.
important.
And that also is true to no two child is gonna have the same experience either,
Exactly.
or not even necessarily the experience. The experience might be the same, it's the response to it, and
Yes.
those choices that we make from it are going to be different. I see that in just the way that me and my sisters, like, we've all just responded and felt and have our own stories and beliefs around what happened, yet
Yeah.
we all experienced the same thing in ways, not everything was the same, but a lot of it was, right? Like, we all
Yeah.
saw my mom work as hard as she did, working 3 jobs and
Mhm.
whatnot. So, but of course there's gonna be different experiences because my oldest sister was then in ways taking care of us. So, we're all experiencing things. Yeah, we're all experiencing things, but at the end of the day, our responses and our choices, they're
Yeah.
all ours. I will say that I've mended my relationship with my dad and I've been able to really let go of everything that's happened and started that clean slate. But it's not necessarily true for my sisters. And I
Yeah.
respect, their relationship and what that looks like. But ultimately it just came to a point where I was just so tired of being angry and
Mhm.
being I was just so tired of being angry and bitter, and so I did what I resonate most with, and I wrote him a letter, and to be honest, it probably wasn't the nicest letter, but I needed to get out my
Yeah.
truth, and I don't even remember what I said, but I remember it sparked us having a conversation, and probably what feels like the first conversation I ever had with him. Not I don't even remember what we said, but I just remember the feeling of like,
Mm.
okay, we have this clean slate and we're moving forward. And that's what we've done ever since that day. And I'm so grateful. I truly am. And I think one thing that I've also realized recently is that I also didn't realize the role that my stepdad has played in all of this too. And it's interesting
Oh.
because what I've realized recently is just having him like filled that role. I lived with my stepdad, he was around, and having him allowed me to fulfill that feeling of like, okay, I know what it's like to have a dad.
Yeah.
And um and I'm so grateful for that because I think that's what made it easier as well for me to let go and just not have this expectation from my dad, and just that relationship. There's just different. We have a different relationship with everyone in our lives.
Oh, for sure. And um, God's gift to us is free will, and that is part of, how we respond to things. So how you talked about your sisters had all the same experience, but they all responded differently. That's because of their free will. They chose to not forgive him, to, hold that like low vibrational energy of being angry. But also Spirit was bringing through is that um, every decision we make is like the way they show it to me is there are multiple doors
Mhm.
and you can choose which door you want to go into, and that's kind of the what if rabbit hole that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So if you go down this door, what's going to happen down that door? What's going to happen? Because there's a plan in every door that you go to.
Yeah. I love that. Gives me chills.
Mm,
And interesting too. Like, do you think that we could also, go through one door? Let's use that analogy and that
yeah,
imagery. I can see it, go through
yeah,
that one door, but then also, again, free will comes in and we can change the
yes.
choice, right? We can go through a new door if we don't like
We can
that
go
door.
exactly.
Yeah.
Another way that Spirit shows me is almost like a timeline, but it branches out. So, like, this is our divine path, and then we branch off to go to this path. But if we
Mhm.
don't like it, we come back. We go
Yeah.
off another path, we don't like it, we come back. So, those are
Yeah.
the two main imageries that Spirit always gives to me when we talk about free will.
Yeah, I love that. I kind of translate that into detours, like
Yes.
are they really detours in us? Well, they are detours, but they're necessary, right? I think sometimes
Yeah,
we can get so frustrated by the detour because we want to be here faster, but then look at what you pick up on the way of that detour, and it's
exactly.
such a beautiful thing when you can have that perspective. And I think oftentimes, in hindsight, you have that
Yeah,
realization, but the more that you can see that, the easier I feel like it becomes when we're feeling the frustration and we can actually lean in instead of like repel where we're being guided to
yeah,
go, even though it feels like, oh, like what's going on here? You know what I mean? Like it can feel like that. And trust me,
yeah,
I know that feeling so well. But if you can like really just embrace and be open to
yeah,
what is meant for you there. There is something meant for you there. And instead of like, why is this happening to me? What's here for me? What is here for me is such a beautiful shift.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's how your relationship with your father has blossomed is because of this, not what is happening to me, but what is happening for me.
Hmm.
So with that, um, you are completely for the most part, completely forgiven him with a
Hmm.
lot of, as you said, you wrote letter and then you started having conversations. I think that letter, when I was tuning into your energy, was very low because you were so angry about it. But
Hmm.
then once you wrote it out, your energy just kind of lifted. And I bet that's what you felt.
Yeah.
You just felt like I needed to get it out and you got it out. And
Yeah. And sometimes that's what it is, right? We just
yeah,
have to say it, write it so imperfectly, and just be like raw and real about it. I could have chosen not to send the letter. I could have chosen to just let that be, but I just felt like I had this opportunity, right? I know that not everyone has this opportunity to be able to have the conversation, to actually send the letter. Like, I understand that part, but I don't think that changes in the sense of it's literally a release. Like, that's the only way that I can look at it. It was just put this down on paper. This is where I can just really acknowledge myself. I think that
Yeah.
was a really big part of it, allowing myself to feel what I felt and just knowing that it was valid. I had every right to feel what I felt, and I got to choose to let it go. And I
Mhm.
think that was a big lesson for me. And this is not something I think that everyone always agrees with, but I feel like I've never resonated with forgive and don't forget.
Mhm.
I I think for me, if I didn't forget, and I don't mean in the sense of like, okay, like I've completely forgotten what you've done. It's more
Yeah.
so from the place of like, I actually use it now as an empowering story to tell. I use it as part of my story to serve a purpose. So yes, I'm never going to forget it, but my resonance with it is very different. I'm not going to remind him constantly of the things that he's done to hurt him, because that's where I feel like there's this disconnect with the forgiveness piece. If you
Yeah.
are forgiving, so quote unquote, saying that you forgive someone, but you bring it up, that's where this disconnect is. And that's where the missing piece here is actually letting it go. And that was the really big piece for me. That was like the breakthrough, was being able to say, I truly forgive you for this. And I'm truly choosing to let this go and starting new and starting fresh. And does that mean our relationship is perfect? Absolutely not.
No.
And I have, talking about just soul contracts, I have been told many times, he had his soul contract and he fulfilled it. He was meant to do and be everything that he
Mhm.
did, because
Yeah.
that's just the way it was supposed to plan out. And I wouldn't be who I am without that experience, without him. And I also acknowledge him for the ways in which he is doing his best as well. He has to learn how to be with us, me and my sisters. He has to learn and navigate what we need, our desires. And so, a big thing in our new relationship, or whatever you want to call it, is that communication piece, like, hey, I don't appreciate when you do this. I need this from you instead. That doesn't happen either without communication. That's a big
Right.
part of it too, right? But the letting go piece was, I think, the big piece that allowed me to move forward.
And I think that's crucial, the letting go piece. That even applies to spiritual healers. Like they have to try to let go of the egoic mind, the human mind. Because if you don't, then you're always going to come back to it. And it's funny that you were saying that about soul contracts, because before you were saying it, Spirit was whispering in my ear that you guys were meant had to do,
Mhm.
get angry at each other, not talk to each other in order to mend and have this beautiful relationship now.
100%. 100%. And when you, again, I know a lot of this comes in hindsight, but I think if you can lean into that when things are happening, it can make it even just a little easier to navigate those moments that are super hard and difficult.
They are, but I tune into your relationship now and it just is high vibrational. It's
Mhm. Yeah. And it's a choice, right? Like, love is a choice. And that's ultimately what it was. Even after experiencing all that I experienced with my dad, and there's lots of people who know of just what transpired. And a lot of people were kind of like, but you have every right to be upset, and you have every right to, in ways, like, punish him for,
Mhm.
what he's done. And honestly, that just never resonated with me. I was like, it takes so much more time and energy, not time, but energy, to be in that space of,
Mhm.
I'm the victim and I have to hate you for this, or always constantly remind you of this. Like, I just don't want to be in that space with anyone, truthfully. So I've like, my relationship with my dad and mending that also allowed me to do that with other relationships, partners that things just never worked out. I was kind of like, well, let's just go on a little rant and do this with everybody else. Started sending some messages to like ex-partners, ex-boyfriends, and I'm
Yeah,
like, this is gonna be out of the blue, but just letting you know, like, I'm sorry for anything that I've done. And it's just like such a freeing thing to like let it go and not have to worry about it anymore, not have to constantly replay any stories that I'm holding on to in those moments. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the choice that I'm making is always love. Always. That's what it
absolutely.
comes down to.
I mean, that's the highest vibrational there is love. So when you're angry or upset or hate it or, like any of those lower, it takes so much more energy. Like you feel it within your body and people feel it within around you. But when you're happy, loving, bubbly self like you are, that is just more yummy and
Mm.
happy to be around.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think there's a dance, right? Because we can't also ignore when those
Yeah.
moments come up, right? When we're feeling sad or we're feeling angry. And yeah, I feel like it's dancing with all of it too, right? Like sitting with
Yeah.
it and getting curious about what it is, because that's ultimately what it is, right? If you're
Yeah.
feeling angry, if you're feeling upset, if you're feeling triggered, it's simply just a little like light bulb going off, right? Like a little alarm going off.
Yep.
And instead of like, instead of just like resisting it, I think the best thing that we can actually do for ourselves is just get curious and lean in. And, hmm, what is this showing me right now? Like that's simplest question that you can ask yourself. And really, I feel like ultimately this is where you really start to get to understand and know yourself at the end of the day, when you start asking yourself these questions and sitting with those questions. Because the more that you just shy away from it, it's just going to continue to come up no matter what. It's gonna continue to show you, continue to come up. But when you can like lean in a little bit, I know it's can feel a little confronting and uncomfortable, but there's so much that you can, let's call it alchemize in that when you actually
Yeah,
can get to the surface, right? You can transform that into anything that you want.
absolutely. And going inward is so powerful. For me, doing this work, just starting it, but a lot of fear-based, was
Mm,
around. So I had to go inward and I'd be like, why am I having this fear? And then I would get down to the page and be like, oh, there's nothing to be scared about.
mm,
And I think going inward and really asking yourself, because that's how you're going to learn about yourself. That's how you're going to learn your intuition and how to communicate with your spirit team. But going inward and being silent. If meditation's not your thing, you don't need to do it, but write, journal, walk in nature, like whatever kind of gets you still and go inward, I think is beautiful.
100. Oh my gosh, you're like speaking everything that I've been creating right now in this moment. Just I've been so focused on that, like one of the things that I've been um not playing with, but just a practice that has become such a ritual and is so sacred is like my time in the morning. And listen,
Yeah.
we're not talking like it has to be 2 hours, sometimes
Yep.
it is that because that's needed, but
Mhm.
10 minutes of
Yeah.
just really connecting. And the way that I look at sacred is just, I kind of call it my little sacred morning, is what I call it. But ultimately, it's just sacred is intentional. If you can be
Yep.
so intentional about that block, that little 5 minutes that you have, if you could be so intentional about that, I promise, even if you're doing that every single day, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, the more grounded that you will feel ultimately, the more connected to yourself, the more grounded you're going to feel. And the more that you were saying, like, the more that you can trust yourself, the more that you can actually hear your intuition. I feel like that's been the biggest unfortunate thing that's happened is just this society is like the hustle and bustle, right? Like we're constantly on the go, go, go,
Hmm.
constantly on our phones, constantly scrolling, constantly consuming.
Yeah.
And the less we are actually hearing ourselves. And then I feel like speaking to you as like a business owner, as an entrepreneur, that's where I feel like we get very lost, is because we
Yeah.
can't even hear our own thoughts, our own ideas. We can't
Yeah.
hear it. We can't hear what feels really good for us or true for us, because we're constantly feeling like we have to outsource our support.
Yeah.
The best support you can have and give yourself is yourself. You know you better than anyone else. No one is going to be able to guide you in your healing. And I say that from the sense of like knowing what's best for you and your own
Yeah.
healing. You know what's best for you, and there's going to be people that are going to support the journey and hold you.
Yep.
Yes. And they're so needed and it's so beautiful. But at the end of the day, I promise the more that you come back to yourself and the more that you kind of ask yourself the questions and go inward, like we're talking about, the more you're going to feel so much trust in yourself and be able to hear and then make these, and then it transpires and you'll see the ripple effect in your decisions, right? Like you
Mhm.
feel more confident in the decisions that you make.
Yeah.
Business, not business, it doesn't matter. Your choices that you make, you feel better because you're knowing that this is what feels right in this moment right now. And you can stand behind it.
That is beautiful. Um, and what you were saying about 5 minutes, the spirit's been telling me for months. Just spend 5 minutes in the morning with us, just meditate, do
Yeah.
automatic writing, whatever it is, just 5 minutes. And let me tell you, when I don't do those 5 minutes, everything goes wrong in my day.
Right?
It's like my energy's thrown off, other people around me's energy is thrown off. Um, in the summer, it's hard for me to do it because I get up so early for work, but once I get back into that routine, I'm gonna get stick right back to it because it makes such a difference.
It
And
truly
in the
does.
morning, it's real. Oh, sorry to interrupt. In the morning, I find is just the most vibrant because you're just it's
Yeah.
just something beautiful in the morning.
I find too, I know you're saying that like you have to wake up really early for work, but like, I mean, and I do as well. Like I usually start at 8 and I've, funny enough, enjoyed waking up so early. I usually have my alarm. It's like 5:45, 6 a.m. And I like enjoy getting out of bed because I know that I'm going to spend this time for myself. I always go to the gym and like it looks different every day. But today I went for a walk in the morning and it's just like, I don't know what
Mm,
it is. There's just something about starting your day. And honestly, what that is you're filling your cup up first. You're serving you first. You're not serving everybody else. You're not letting the whole world in. You're serving yourself first. And I think that's, the whole idea of, not scrolling and looking at your phone first thing in the morning. It's just these little micro tiny shifts that you can create yourself for yourself that sounds so cheesy. I know how it sounds. It sounds so cheesy because everyone says it. But if you can do it and you really integrate that into your routine and create this ritual around it, you're going to see the difference. Like I promise you, because, and I speak from my own self of just like the last 2 years of just connecting. And a big part of my ritual is cacao. And but more so too as well, like just connecting with my guides, connecting with the spirit of cacao, connecting with my guides and building this relationship. And honestly, I'm just kind of blown away by like some of the stuff that comes through. I'm like, whoa, what is happening here? But it's, I just feel so grounded, when
yeah,
right now in my life, there's so much happening. I work full time. I'm planning a wedding. I'm building my business. Like there's a lot happening in my life, but I'm not stressed. And I actually feel, someone asked me the other day how I'm feeling. And I'm like, I just feel so grounded. I feel so grounded because I'm taking care of me. And that's what it is ultimately.
absolutely. So, segue to your business, Studio Press. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's amazing.
Oh yeah. It's so funny how things are like interconnected in a sense of, if it wasn't for the conversation that I had with my dad and the healing that I did with my dad, I don't think I would have gotten to this place of like, I really want to put this into a book, which
Mhm.
ultimately would never lead to the studio press. So that's kind of what happened is like, I just felt this deep pull to just put all these lessons that I was learning through my experience and through my healing or my spiritual awakening into a book. And so I did that. It's called The Key to Happiness. And I feel like it, in terms of it really targets who I was in, high school. So like the younger generation, the young girls who struggle with confidence and all of that because that was such a big part of my journey too. But yeah, like writing my book then transformed into hearing, because I published it when I was 24, and I had people afterwards saying, I have this manuscript on my laptop and I don't know what to do with it. And I was like, what do you mean you don't know what to do with it? Like it kind of broke my heart, where I'm like, just seeing women that were older than me and just kind of holding on to these stories
Yeah.
that just needed to be in the world. And so that's kind of what transpired and sparked this journey of helping people and supporting people on their journey. And yeah, and I started the Studio Press now going 4 years ago. I started the Studio Press,
Wow.
and yeah, I know it was like COVID, funny enough, like COVID hit and I was starting this, and I was running it a little bit by myself, and then partnered with someone, and now I'm back to running it by myself too. But it's there's so much power in being able to tell your story, is ultimately what it is. Like, I predominantly work with nonfiction books. So, like poetry and the self-help, like that's my love, I guess you
Mm.
could say, is that area, that genre, and just helping entrepreneurs, spiritual leaders be able to turn their teachings into a book. Because, ultimately, if we think about it, the things that last, and when we talk about wanting to have this ripple effect and wanting to impact and leaving an impact and talk about our legacy, it's ultimately what is going to be left behind. A book is something that it will always be around, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about online programs, right? If you're not hosting it online and unfortunately you pass away, then what? There might be some online program, but like there needs to be something that's funding that's there. And a book is something that lives on. It lives on. Think about so many beautiful teachers that we have access to, Wayne Dyer and so many other people
Mhm.
who are no longer here, and yet we still talk about their work and read their words. And that's like the essence of the Studio Press, and what I hope to support people with is being able to transform their teachings into a book, and just be able to connect and with their audience, with their people, make that impact, the reach. And it's just such a cathartic experience. That's what I always hear from our clients,
Mm.
of how healing it is to write your own book and go through that process. Even though you have probably already gone through your own healing, there's even more waiting for you.
And sometimes when you write, you find out more about this situation that happened because when you're writing it, at least for me, when I do automatic writing, a lot of the times it's spirit just taking over
Yeah.
and not me writing. And I feel
Yeah.
like some of your authors are probably feeling the same way is when they're writing about their experiences, they write something extra because something's coming through where it's like, oh, I didn't remember that happened.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. Yeah, more comes through when you can sit down and write about it, because you're so in it, right? Like you're really in it. And maybe you've kind of hit one, piece or area of the part of the puzzle, right? But more becomes unveiled. And I think that's one of the things as well that I love to teach, is in just working with clients, is that the not rushing to write the book. Like, yes, it's possible to write the book in like a month if you really wanted to. I've met people who have done that. And I also wrote my book in 3 months. Now, doing it, kind of going through on this journey, I'm writing my second book, and I'm like, I am taking my space and my time, and I'm
Mhm.
in loving it. It's just very different experience. But the reason why I say this is just the taking your time with it. You allow yourself to really live, and things almost marinate a little bit more, and you give yourself that space for more to come through. And you can use what's happening already in your life. As entrepreneurs, I think one of the biggest things that I see is like, I don't have enough time to write a book. When am I going to write a book? Right? Like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you that you probably have a lot of content already that is worth for the book. But the way that I look at it is like, you don't stop what you're doing. You don't stop serving your clients. You don't stop doing anything that you're already doing. How can you use what you're already doing as a way to also support and guide? And it can happen so subconsciously, not even like forcing it to happen, where you're actively like doing things that's going to support your book. No, you don't have to do that. I've through my podcast, having these conversations, it was almost like I started to get this like sense, okay, another book is going to come. Another book is going to come. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, okay, guides. All right. I thought it was going to be like a one and done. No, my guides are like, all right, you're going to do another one. I'm like, okay, all right. Through the conversations I've had, though, it's so interesting to see almost in a way where it's like market research for the book, where these conversations are taking me on that. They're reminding me like, oh, this is for the book. Like, it's like I'm having a conversation as I'm having a conversation. My guides are like, this is for the book, by
Yes.
the way. You just kind of go document it afterwards, but it's all supportive, right? Of the conversations end up supporting that journey in the book that's unfolding or unraveling.
And I think there's something, when you take your time with it, you get more inspired, or you meet certain people, or you have certain experiences that are supposed to go in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how, you come again full circle to your dad about, writing your letter, then writing your book, and then doing studio press. I think it all comes back to your spiritual awakening. It's all, and your guides keep saying you're healing your inner child by mending that relationship with your dad.
Mm. Yeah, I feel that. I feel that in many ways. It's interesting. I don't always kind of resonate, or I feel like I've been very curious of like, okay, this inner child, like, what is that? And I don't always know what that is,
Yeah.
in terms of like, what does she need to heal? But again, things start to like appear, right? Like we had
Yeah.
one kind of layer of my relationship with my dad, but a couple years ago, I remember being asked in this like container, and what I realized was like I have a lot of like proving energy that comes through in what I do, and I'm kind of like, what's that about? One day I'm on a walk and I'm like, oh my God, now I understand, because, my dad not being around, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
do all these things, accomplish all these things, and he'll notice you. He'll give you that attention. I'm like, oh, here we go. And that's what I think of when I think of my little Ashley self.
Yeah, our inner child just wants love and just wants to be heard. So
Yeah.
you definitely heard that little inner child when you started mending that relationship.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And that's the thing, right? Is when we can use this, it's not an easy time. It definitely wasn't. There was definitely
Yeah.
challenges and whatnot, but and there's just a lot of stories that have come, and it's not it what the interesting part of it too is like my dad's such a main character in this, in my journey and in my story, but there's also aspects because of as a result how, my relationship with my sisters and my relationship with
Hmm.
my mother, like it's all so intertwined in ways, and there's just different things that you're meant to learn with different people. I can't remember where I was going with that, but ultimately I think it's using everything as a purpose, right? And that's what I really feel. Once you almost like have that awakening, once you can kind of get to that hindsight place, where things kind of make sense and you kind of do that work and you go inward, then there comes
Yeah.
to a place where I feel like I'm always kind of like, what can I do with this? Like, how can I serve with this? And that ultimately always comes down to, when we use our platforms, I think it's such a beautiful space. Whether
Yeah.
you want to write a book, whether you want to simply just cultivate, like create a community on socials, right? Like all of this, have a podcast, are simply ways to serve. And it's such a beautiful thing. Ultimately, talking a lot about purpose, one thing that I heard from a client or someone that was on my podcast and it stuck with me was that, all of our purposes are love, all of them. Our
Yes.
sole purpose is love. But how we distribute love into the world is what's going to look different. And I was like, that makes so much sense. That is so beautiful. Right? Because I think
Yes.
sometimes we're like, what's my purpose? What am I here to do? You're here to be love. Now,
Yeah.
let's unpack. What does that look like for you? And what really brings you joy? That's ultimately what it's going to be. Right? Like, ooh, I feel really lit up about writing a book. Great. That's going to be one way that you bring love into the world.
Yeah. And when you said that, all I saw was both of our guys just jumping up and down and be like, yes, they understand.
We get it. We're listening. We're listening.
We're getting there. Um, They totally distracted me. I was totally going to say something. I lost it. Thanks, Spirit.
It's all good.
So you said you were writing your second book.
Mhm.
Now you said that this book you're taking your time with it.
Mm.
Are you, for anybody that's curious about writing a book, are you, because everybody's writing process is different,
Yeah.
right? So your first book, you just kind of banged it out in a month for what was it, 3 months?
3 months. 3 months. Yeah.
Three
It was.
months. And then this one you're going nice and slow. What do you have a process? Like, do you set a time to write? Do you block off time to write down, or do you write when you feel inspired or when your guides are around? Just a curious question.
Yeah, I think the inspiration is such a big piece and part of it. I'm a big believer in writing a book or not, just like creative when, as business owners, like when we're trying to create something new, we're, trying to brainstorm. Like, I think ultimately there has to be some sort of creativity or spark that's happened to dive into, to be in that
Mm,
space. I feel like anytime I'm feeling just not into it, whether it be writing a book or doing something else, I allow myself the space to like step away. Even though, let's say, for example, I've blocked off an entire day and I'm going to work on this. And then the day comes and I'm like, "Bleh, I don't like this." I will do things that hopefully will spark that inspiration, go for a walk, listen to something that activates me and creates that inspiration. But sometimes it's just not forcing it. We're creative beings and
yeah.
we are going to ebb and flow. And especially as women, I've talked a lot about like on the podcast and just like connecting with a lot of women, my menstrual cycle also plays a big role in this too. But I think in terms of the process, what is very different right now is having my podcast supporting what's coming through has just been so supportive. I feel like right now I'm in this like stage of brainstorming and just asking the question. So I'm not even at the part where I've even created any sort of outline. It's like very rough. I
Yeah.
haven't started writing anything. It's more so in this, okay, this idea and the concept is there. Now, guides, tell me what this is supposed to be. Like, that's really the
Yeah.
conversation that I'm having right now is just show me, tell me, guide me. Like, what is this supposed to be? And so I'm kind of in that space right now. And I'm often doing that now with just other things that I'm creating. It's just okay. I get like a piece of it, right? Like you get the piece of the one piece of the puzzle, and you're
Yeah.
just like, okay, what is this though? Like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this yet. It just
Yeah.
hasn't come through, right? That happened a couple weeks ago. Like something came through and I was like, I'm really activated by what I've just written here. No idea what this is. Well, it revealed itself later on, it's like a framework for a book um and it's so activating. But I guess to just answer that question is just I'm in that space of being able to kind of just gain the clarity on what is it? What is it supposed to be? What's the intention? I feel like one thing a lot of people skip over in that process of writing a book is the intention. Who is this actually for? What's the intention? What's the purpose? That part you can't skip over, right? Like,
Right.
if we talk about marketing, if you try to speak to everyone, you're going to speak to no one. Like, I feel like there's truth in it. So, that piece is really important to do that brainstorming piece. Like, what is this supposed to be? And then once you
Yeah.
have more clarity, then you can start moving into, okay, let's create an outline. Let's do some market research. Let's kind of have conversations with this ideal reader that I have in mind.
Yeah.
And then there's so much preparation before you actually dive into writing.
I bet. And I love that you're incorporating your spirit guides because ultimately the way I tune into your energy is that they're really guiding you. They're your supporters. They're the ones that are going to help you get to the people that you want to get to. So by incorporating them and they know the divine timing, the divine path. So as long as
Yeah.
you're working with them, they're like you said, it's a puzzle piece. I think all spiritual healers, everybody actually in general, will get a puzzle piece, like a 10,000 piece puzzle and be like, well, where does this go?
Right.
I actually just was doing automatic writing a few hours before I hopped on here with you. And I said, Spirit, I feel lost. Like, I don't know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Show me the way. And all of a sudden, I just saw like a glimpse future view of like having a studio with mats and their healers and things like that, like a little studio space. And I was like, what's going to happen? And they're like, yeah, you just got to keep going.
Mhm. And it can be frustrating. Like, I will
Yeah.
say that I'm in the frustration a lot, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'm in this space of, like,
Hmm.
pieces are coming. Great. Great. I'm getting the pieces. Now I want it all together is what I want, you know? Um,
Yes.
I'll be honest, I'm super impatient. Like, I'm super impatient. So I think for me, it's just like wanting it to like all make sense right now. And that's
Yeah.
also, I think, another piece of this is that I'm always in this like, okay, I want it to make sense. I want this to make sense.
Yeah.
And sometimes not everything makes sense right away. Um, but I will say, like, I haven't always had this relationship with my guides. I've had a relationship, very strong relationship with my grandmother, who I knew right away was my guide.
Hmm.
And also my cousin shows up as well. He, I just get those signs. Like he passed when he was 20. He was at that tragic passing that
Oh,
happened. And
okay.
yeah, he just like as an essence, again, like it's like the way he lived his life is like such an inspiration to me, like talk about someone who like in such a short amount of time fulfilled such a beautiful life in ways, right? And so sometimes it's like, that whole idea or, the quote or the saying, whatever it is, but there are some people who live more in 20 years than one does in 60 years or 70
Yeah.
years. That's not everyone, but there is truth to that. And it's interesting that came up when I was writing my book or after. I didn't think about it until I had someone talk about or mention someone did a review on my book, and they were kind of like, I was hesitant because I know she's young, I know she's 24, and like, what is she gonna teach me about happiness? And I was like, ouch. Didn't think about that one. But ultimately she ended up like being surprised. And I was like, well, geez, thank God. But I didn't think about that. And so I didn't think about that, like that misconception that we have sometimes, around age and around what that looks like. And it's interesting. I feel like that's plays such a big role as well with like the relationship that we have with our parents, yes, there are parents, and yes, there's having the respect and also just seeing them as human too,
Yeah.
they're not going to know how to handle every situation. And that has been a big piece of like just having compassion with my dad and talk about more healing is just having that compassion. He's not perfect. He's not gonna know
Yeah.
everything what to do. He's human as well. He's learning along the way too. So
I mean, we're all souls just going through Earth School, as Spirit likes to show me, is that
yeah.
we're all learning, that we're all here to learn life lessons and meet certain people and do certain things and have purposes. So,
Yeah, exactly. Do you think I don't know why I'm asking this question, but I'm curious your take on it. Do you feel
yeah.
like we are on this search of finding ourselves, or is it about remembering?
Ooh, I think it's about finding ourselves.
Mm.
Only because we do go through different lifetimes,
Mm-hmm.
and every lifetime is different, and we're not always in the same body every lifetime. So, for me, Spirit has shown every lifetime you're supposed to either learn the same lesson that you didn't learn the previous one, or you're supposed to learn a new one. And I
Yeah.
think that's why we got to learn ourselves. Because if we don't learn ourselves, then how are we supposed to fulfill our purpose?
Mm. Interesting. I've never heard someone have that take. And I always kind of believe the opposite in that we're trying to remember rather than find ourselves. But it's an interesting perspective, though, because I also agree in the whole lifetimes aspect. So I don't know why that question came through.
It was meant to come through.
Yeah.
I think there's also like an aspect of, being remembered, but also like, in the aspects of the books,
Mhm.
as your publishing company and like Wayne Dyer and Louise Hayes and all those other spiritual teachers. They didn't write the book to be wanted to be remembered.
Mm,
I believe that they wanted to write the books to help people,
mm,
not knowing that all of Wayne Dyer's 40-something books are still being purchased to this day.
Yeah.
So I think it goes both ways. I think we need
Mm.
to find ourselves, but we also need to be remembered as well.
Yeah.
But in that aspect, like depends on the person and what their purpose
Yeah.
is totally dependent if they want to be remembered and by who they want to be remembered. Because I think when you think of how do I want to be remembered, you're first going to think about your family. That's
Yeah.
who's really going to remember you.
Yeah.
And then once that family unfortunately passes away, then what happens?
Hmm. Yeah. I feel like it's interesting. I think not all of us think in that lens or think about that, right? We're kind of just so focused on like the immediate, but I think ultimately like what kind of came through was just how, we right to be remembered. It feels very much focused on the ego, whereas when we can really strip that back and come from a place of love, of purpose, of serving,
Yeah,
it's felt. It truly makes a difference when you can, and that's a whole journey to be able to let go of our ego and what our ego wants and desires, and not having that judgment towards that ego, right? Because
yeah,
I truly can say that writing my first book, I'll be fully transparent, very ego based. Like, I'm going to do this because I want to be a speaker and I want to be known for something and I want to, like, very much focused on that. And that's why I think too is like there's just it's just a journey that we go through too at the end of the day, right? Like it's one of the layers to it. It's one of the pieces of the things that you have to learn. When you can let go of your ego, then serving from this place also just ultimately feels different. And you can feel the difference when something comes from ego and something comes simply from a place of service.
absolutely. And like you said, it feels different. The energy feels different, but also when you're doing it, feels different.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing it from a place of love and servitude versus a place of the egoic mind. Like for example, me, doing this podcast. My ego was like, no, 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 don't do it. Nobody's gonna listen, blah, 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 blah. But
Yeah.
then feeling the love and the servitude was like, do it. You reach whoever you reach, and that's it. So,
Hmm.
and the
Exactly.
ego is gonna be with you every day, every step of the way, because fortunately, that's what we have on this Earth school, and we just learn to tune it down. It's never gonna go away,
Hmm.
but just tune it down, continue to go inward.
Yeah, and pause too. Give yourself that space to pause and to actually check in with yourself. And I
Yeah.
think that comes back to that piece that we were talking about before of just that space and that time that you give yourself in the morning is also a check-in with yourself, a check-in with how you're feeling. What do I need? When do we ask ourselves those questions? Unless you're like actively in
Yeah.
this space and you're on this journey, you're not going to ask yourself that question. You're going to be
No.
just ignoring it, right? And this is what the whole point of just filling your cup up first,
Yeah.
taking care of you first. How are you going to serve, take care of anybody else? Anyone. I don't care who it is, your children, your partner. How are you going to take care of anyone if you're not taking care of yourself? Right. Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's where the whole, piece around just like constantly giving, constantly making sure everybody else is okay. Selfishly, I've always kind of had that piece of like, I want to be selfish and I want to like take care of me first.
Yeah.
Like, I know the dishes have to be washed, but like, I selfishly just want to kind of like paint right now. So, like, I'm going to paint, I'll wash the dishes after. Like, I'm very selfish in that way. I'm
Yeah.
very aware of it too. But, anyways, just a silly little example, but just the little things that you're like, I really want to go and do this, go and do it, like,
Yeah.
hey, I really want to go and play right now. Go play, please. Like, I think just this piece around just taking life like so seriously and just not allowing ourselves to experience the play or
Yeah.
using play as a reward. Why did we learn this? unfortunately, I know things are passed down, and it is one of those things, right? You don't eat your dinner, you don't get it to go outside and play. Like
I
when
heard
did,
that one a lot.
right? You don't do this, you don't get that. It's like, come on, come on.
Yeah. And what Spirit is whispering in my ear is that if you feel like you need rest, rest.
Yeah.
I Saturdays are usually like my editing the podcast, like recording some Instagram reels, and recently, like not feeling like Instagram reels, and they're like, it's okay. The
Yeah.
reel will come when it needs to come.
Yeah.
So I was trying to like, bulk, like record that way I could schedule them all out. And last Saturday I was like, feel like it. And they're like,
Yeah.
okay, don't feel like it then. So I think
Right?
that's important to know is that you don't always gotta be productive. Like it's okay to
Mhm.
like relax and listen to your body and listen to your soul.
Yeah. That is the best gift I think you can give yourself is that. And especially as a woman, and I think I talk about this a lot because it's been becoming so much more apparent in my own life of just like syncing with my cycle and just understanding. Just I'm not saying like using it as an excuse, in the sense of like just using it as a tool, as an awareness
Mhm.
piece, of just really acknowledging how you're feeling. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all cyclical beings, right? So
Yeah.
you are going to notice and feel just like the weather is feeling. Like you're going to notice that in your own life.
Hmm.
I notice it all the time. Like in the winter, I'm like, all right, we're going a little inward. Sometimes I'm not fully lined up there and I'm like, summer feels like a little bit of an inward period. Like summer feels like winter, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I think just there's a level of honesty, I feel like, is what I wanted to say when it came to the whole rest thing.
Yeah.
There's like rest. And I think I come from experience when I say this in the sense of like avoidance and procrastination because there's something underlying. There's some sort of fear of of that, if that makes sense. Like for
Yeah.
example, I used to always take naps in the middle of the day. My schedule was different, so I would always have a nap before work. And to be honest, I don't know if every day I really needed a nap. I'm not gonna lie. I said I did, but I really don't think. I was just kind of avoiding like all the other things that I needed to do. And so I think there's just like this level of honesty with ourselves, right? And being able to
Yeah.
trust ourselves and listen to ourselves. When we need rest, we need rest. When we are in a space of like feeling like avoiding something, like okay, what is that too, right? Like what is that about? And don't avoid it. Don't try and like kind of, all right, well, I'm just going to go do this instead because I don't want to explore that.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, like again, just the honesty piece that we can guard ourselves, but the rest is such a huge piece. And sometimes it's going to feel frustrating when it takes longer than you want because I've been in a long stretch of just like inward, of just, all right, what am I here? What am I doing?
Eh,
And it's frustrating, but it's so rewarding when you can give yourself that space and you don't force. You let go a little bit, you
yeah.
surrender. Also, I know it's hard, but it's not easy and it's not hard. It's like a constant reminder of like, it's okay. I'm not
Yeah.
behind on anything. And I feel like that's constantly what it was for me, was just like this story of like, I'm falling behind. I'm falling behind on what? What am I falling behind on?
Yeah.
Please tell me, you know? So,
Yeah. It's that type A personality. I'm the same way. I'm like, to-do list. I'm not a procrastinator because that just gives me anxiety, but like I'm always like got a to-do list, and if I don't do the to-do list, like I keep thinking about it. And this year Spirit was like, don't make a to-do list. Just go with
mm.
the flow.
And how's that been for you? I'm curious.
It's working. Um, I'm definitely listening more. Like I used to be like, all right, I'm gonna be creative today. I'm gonna go do this X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I find that with like if I don't have the energy for it, then I'm like, okay, it's not the day to go be creative and like vamp up the website or something like that, Like I'm like, okay, the time will come. And for me,
Mm.
I find like after work, after a long day of work, like nothing creative is
Yeah.
there after that for me. So
Hmm.
it's either like pre-record on the weekends when I have the energy. And I always do things when I feel in alignment. Like if it's not in alignment in the moment, then either it just doesn't come out right or doesn't hit where it needs to hit. So that's what I've been doing this year is just go with an alignment.
I love that. I mean, I still have the to-do list as well, but I find like what has just served me. And I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people, like coaches, right, have talked about like set certain days for certain tasks. Like, okay, let's try this. Let's do some time blocking, right? Let's
Yeah.
try this. Let's try and be super structure and rigid. Never lasted a day. Like, never. Because I'm like, but I don't feel like doing that today. And so I'm trying to do something else. And yet I'm like, I really want to go and do this instead. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? So instead, like tangible, one of the things that I've done is just, okay, like what am I going to focus on this week? Like what are the like three things I really want to focus on? Maybe it's just one thing, but what do I really want to focus on this week? Okay, whenever that happens this week, it's not like it's going to get done,
Yeah.
but I'm going to get to choose and feel into every single day and kind of like, do I feel like tackling this day? Yeah. All right, let's do it. Do I feel like tackling today? No. Right? Like you give, and I've been so much more productive ultimately because
Yeah.
I'm leading with my energy.
Yeah. And you're not forcing anything.
Exactly.
Sometimes with the forcing, like I said, it doesn't come out right. Or
Yeah.
you're trying to force it and you like when I first started Instagram, I kept recording like 10 times over and over and over again because I knew I had to do it, but it wasn't coming out right. The
Mm,
spirit was just like, you have to do it when you're aligned, when you're
yeah.
grounded, because you're gonna keep doing it and you're not gonna like it.
Yeah. Exactly. Lead with that. Lead with that. Like pay attention to that. Notice that. Like it's so beautiful when you can become so aware of it. And yes, there's gonna be like the little tasks that have to get done. Like things have to get done. Yes,
Yeah.
100%. But I think creativity is one thing that can't be forced. No matter what you try and do, it cannot be forced whatsoever.
Nope.
Yeah.
All right, Ashley. So we're wrapping up toward the end, but I do want you to touch on your podcast and cacao ceremonies, if you can go like a little tidbits into those things.
Yeah. Well, my podcast is called Beyond the Surface, and I feel like this is like our conversation is exactly that. It's just taking these pieces, right? Like the things that we want to talk about, the human experience, just spiritual, all those different layers, and just being able to sit in conversation. I feel I resonated really deeply with, starting a podcast that was never about like how many downloads. Like, I don't even check. I like probably check
Yeah,
once a month because I'm just like, I'm curious. Like, let's see.
yeah,
I don't even know what I'm looking at, to be honest, when it comes to these metrics. No idea what I'm looking at. But I genuinely have just loved story being in, like, I
yep,
mean, hey, I studio press. I love story and I love being in conversation and being able to do this, right? Like
yeah,
us, two strangers, having such a beautiful, in depth conversation and bringing our experiences. Like, what a gift. What a gift. And they're so activating.
yeah.
So there's just so many different layers and aspects of like topics that are being covered. And I'm always trying to like get out of the box too, right? Like just find these other layers. Like I really want to have someone come on and talk about intimacy. I don't know why, but that's kind of what I'm putting out into the world.
Yeah.
Um, but that's my podcast. And then cacao, I feel like is just such a big piece to me being having this relationship with my guides. It was something that it's interesting. Like I feel like I'll resonate with this, or maybe not, I don't know. But before I ever drank cacao or experienced cacao, this plant medicine, it was almost like I was being guided to certain things that were preparing me
Yeah.
to be able to sit in ceremony. And when I mean that, I mean in the sense of like, for example, like chanting. I don't know if you've ever been to a circle and you have a song and everyone sings this song together. Like I had never experienced that before. And then
Yeah.
I did, where my business partner at the time, We had this like beautiful book launch one night where we brought like a co-author experience together. And she was like, we're going to sing a song together. And I'm like, what is this? Like, what are we doing here? It was so weird. And then I like loved it. It was like this, no, like this remembering of like, I've done this before. Like,
Yeah.
this is comfortable. And when I first sat in my first ceremony with Cacao, we chanted. And of course, like I felt so comfortable. I was like, yeah, let's dive into this. Right. So it's just interesting, where I notice how it's almost like I was being guided constantly. At one
Yeah.
point, I was thinking, like, ooh, I really want to try psilocybin. There was some sort of hesitation there. And I was like, okay, we're trusting that hesitation. And then it was Cacao, and I experienced Cacao, and I've gone through two like dietas, and this medicine is here to, I talk a lot about love, right? Like we've talked
Mhm.
a lot about love here on the
Yeah.
podcast, and that's the essence of Cacao, is to bring you back to your heart. Ultimately, that's what it is, to open your heart, to bring you back to your heart, to reconnect to yourself. And it's this beautiful, gentle medicine. When people think about these master plant medicines, people think immediately of ayahuasca,
Yeah.
and there's big like purge that happens, and sometimes it looks almost like, the best way I can describe it is like that crumbling, right? Like it's very emotional. um and that always serves a purpose too. But the way that I look at, like with Cacao, as the opposite, is kind of like, just to bring that comparison, it's a very gentle plant medicine. um you're not going on this, like there's no hallucinogenics, there's nothing along those lines. It's simply just an experience that you're guided to. And then when you compare it, when you add different modalities, for example, breath work
Mhm.
takes you even deeper. Like it is just so beautiful to connect with this medicine. And there's so many medicines. That's the thing. Like there's so many medicines. There's so many guides, right? Like we have our guides. I see my
Yeah.
grandmother as one of my guides, but then this spirit of Cacao is also a guide, and it's just a different spirit. Like there's just so
Mm.
many, and I feel like you could speak to that more
Yeah.
than anyone. But they're just guiding us, and that's what they're waiting for. They're waiting for us to call upon them,
Yeah.
to ask for that support. And once upon a time, we didn't have this access to Cacao, right? And to these
Yeah.
medicines. They were only available to shamans and priestesses. And now we have this access, but there's still such a deep honoring of it, being able to understand that. And so I went through the whole facilitator training and to become a ceremonialist. And it's just beautiful. It like pairs so much with my gentle, playful energy. And
Hmm.
that's why I love Cacao so much.
Yeah. And when you were saying about the guides are guiding you, your guides were actually whispering in my ear and saying, um, you know, they're happy that you found Cacao because when you call upon them, they're an extension of God, higher power, source, however you resonate with. So when you call upon them, I mean they're around you anyways. But when
Yeah.
you call upon them, then that gives them almost like the step to be with you. And also there's a beautiful thing about thanking them for their guidance or their message or their sign that they sent you. So whenever I see a sign or I get a message that says, "Thank you, angels, for sending me this sign," because that's
Yes.
love. You're giving love energy, they're giving it back. So I just
Mhm.
had to throw that tidbit in there.
Yeah, I always having Cacao, a cup of Cacao is like part of that morning routine that I have, that morning ritual. And I always start with thank you for this day. Thank you.
Yes.
Um, but every time I actually didn't used to do this until I saw a video on TikTok, and it was like, when you're seeing these signs, I see angel numbers all the time. Like anytime I'm
Same.
in a car,
Yep.
bet I'm gonna see it. Like it just, and it's become a funny game now. My fiance thinks it's a joke. He's like, I just don't get it. Like he's like, you should play the lottery. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not a
That's not
lottery
how it
thing.
works.
It's not a lottery thing. I just know that I'm gonna see it. And
Yeah.
um Yeah, after watching this video, I started saying thank you. Like it didn't even matter. It was just seeing it. I'm like,
Yep.
thank you, and it's like you said, just this beautiful honoring of of the guidance that they want to give us. And what you were saying is just the permission, right? It gives when we call upon them, it's giving them that permission. That's what they're waiting for, right? Like they're
Yep.
waiting for you to create that space. They're waiting to guide you. They're waiting. And I feel like it's just, again, like this extension too of,
Yeah.
in ways, an extension of us too. Like we are this
Yes.
extension. I know, like, I don't fully understand that myself. So I think it's hard for me to dive into that. But I don't know. I just feel like we're an extension as well of these guides and these medicines. And so
Yeah.
you're talking to yourself, right? Like you're getting
Yeah.
your guidance. And this is what I mean about this connection and the space that you create. Like it's just become such a big practice for me. And I think now I just understand it differently. I never understood it to the extent that I do now, experiencing it and just being so intentional of like, anytime I'm questioning, anytime I'm looking for an answer, anytime I'm looking for guidance, I was that person. I was distracted by the shiny objects, the
Hmm.
coaches, the programs. I was that person until very recently. So it's a very recent practice where I'm just like, I'm not going to go to the next thing unless it genuinely feels really good for me right now. Um, instead, I'm going to talk to my guides. And that was the
Hmm.
promise that I made myself. So it's just been that daily promise, talking to them. Sometimes I'm just like, show me what this is. And then it doesn't come right away, right? It just, you're open to receiving when it's meant to come.
Absolutely. And to answer your question about how we're an extension of them
Yeah.
is, you know, the way I see it is that we have our human body and then we have our soul body laying on top. And our soul body is part of the other side of heaven. So there is a part
Mhm.
of us that are in heaven currently, other side. That's how we're extended to them, is because
Mhm.
we're all up there.
See? Love it. I love when you bring your perspective into it. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Oh my God, I love this conversation so much. We went over time, but I don't care because that was really amazing.
I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for guiding this conversation and
Oh,
for our guides that showed up here today, too.
they were all up in this conversation today. So I just like to close out with where can people find you? Social media, website, and if you're doing any offerings.
Good question. So, best would be my personal, as you can connect to everywhere else. I am mainly on Instagram. That's my love is Instagram words by Ashley-Ann. And from there, you can see the studio press, my podcast, and all that fun stuff. And yeah, that's what feels really good to share right now as I'm in this space of, just it's I don't know what we're calling it. I'm like in this incubator is what we're calling it right now. But there are
Okay.
beautiful things coming with
Yeah.
cacao and so many different ways. So that's the best.
Well, I'm so excited to see what you come up with. Let me know when your other book comes out. What's your first book called again? So people can get
The key to happiness.
Key to Happiness. Perfect.
Mhm.
So I'll have all the links down in the show notes. Thank you, Ashley, so much. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can always find me at ChristinaAngelMessenger.com or Christina Angel Messenger on Facebook and Instagram. Remember, there's no H in Christina. Please leave a comment below if this podcast has resonated with you or if you had any aha moments. Also, please leave a podcast review. I want this podcast to reach as many people as possible. I feel like the topics and the speakers that I will have will resonate with many people around the world. Thank you, friends, and see you next Monday.